Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. Recently, news about the United States 2020 presidential election has been hogging the headlines, not just in America, but in many countries all over the developed world. Why? Whether you like it or not, the United States is a highly developed economy. It is the single largest economy in the world in terms of nominal GDP and net worth. World Bank data suggests that the United States contributes about 25% of global GDP since 1980. The United States is the largest recipient and financier of foreign direct investment. It is also the largest importer and the second largest exporter in the world. Its market is arguably the most important export destination for many countries around the world. The United States dollar is the most widely used currency in global trade and commerce and financial transactions. The greenback is also the official or de facto currency in many countries and markets. The overall market capitalization of the United States stock market accounts for more than a third of the world's stock market capitalization. The United States is one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. Its creative and innovative capabilities is at or near the forefront of many scientific discoveries and achievements. The United States play an important part in the world because of its size, influence, interconnectedness, and military capabilities. As a champion of human equality, rights, and freedom, it has widespread appeal and support. Its trade and commerce, monetary policies, and conditions of its economy and market can influence the landscape and direction of the global economy. And that's why it's important to take a deeper interest in United States geopolitical and economic positions and influences. One of the key drivers of changes in geopolitical and economic landscapes is the ascension of Mr. Joe Biden as the 46th President of the United States of America on 20th of January 2021. In this seminar, we will look at how Bidenomics will possibly impact the economy and markets. We will first look at what we can learn from and learn about Mr. Joe Biden, especially if you are a leader, entrepreneur, or investor. Second, we will look at how he won the 2020 presidential election in the United States to have an understanding of the general belief and perspective of the Americans. Third, we will examine Mr. Joe Biden's positions on major policies and issues. These will help us better analyze and predict his plans and initiatives. Fourth, it is understandable that Mr. Biden will have to launch major initiatives in the near future to win the trust and confidence of his people. We will look at how these initiatives can possibly impact the economy and markets. Fifth, the road ahead for Mr. Joe Biden will not be an easy one. He has to correct past mistakes and at the same time chart a new path forward. We will review the challenges and how these challenges may impact future landscapes. Last but not least, we will look at some possible responses to Bidenomics. This webinar is part of a series of webinars that we will be launching in the near future. Please watch all the webinars to have a complete and clearer picture of how you can survive and succeed in the new economy. So what can we learn from Mr. Joe Biden? Mr. Joe Biden grew up in a working class family. When his father lost his wealth in business, they had to face great hardship, and Mr. Biden had to live with his maternal grandparents. Since young, he struggled with a stutter and was bullied because he couldn't speak well. Although he improved in his early 20s, the stutter could have taken a negative bearing on his confidence level and speeches. Mr. Biden didn't do well in school and graduated 506th position in a class of 688 students. He was subsequently drafted for military service but failed his medical examination due to asthma. Mr. Biden initially practiced as a lawyer, but he did not do well and had to supplement his income by managing properties. It was said that on his second date with his first wife, Nelia, in a restaurant, he didn't have enough money to pay for the bill. Nelia passed $20 to him under the table. In 1972, Mr. Biden was the only Democrat who was willing to stand against a relatively more popular Republican, Mr. J. Caleb Box. He won the elections even though he had almost no money for a campaign and the odds were against him. Shortly after the election, tragedy struck. His wife and their one-year-old daughter, Naomi, were killed in an automobile accident. His two sons were badly injured. After the tragedy, he considered resigning from his political position. He had mental struggles and took to the bottle and almost came to the brink of suicide. At 30, Mr. Biden became one of the youngest senators in the United States history. However, to see his sons every day, he had to commute by train for about 90 minutes each way between his home and Delaware and Washington, D.C. In 2015, Mr. Biden suffered another setback. His son, Mr. Bill Biden, died of brain cancer. That tragedy must have taken a toll on him. Mr. Biden stood for the 1988 Democratic presidential nomination, but he had to withdraw amidst a cloud of controversies and challenges. In February 1988, Mr. Biden went through a major surgery for aneurysm. About a month later, he went through another operation for the same illness. As a result of the operation, the rest and recuperation kept him away from the Senate for about 7 months. Throughout his career, Mr. Biden built up a reputation for gaffes. By putting his foot in his mouth, every now and then, he stepped on a few toes in his political career. In 2008, Mr. Biden had to withdraw from the presidential election because he was not able to raise sufficient funds. In addition, he could not draw crowds to his rallies, and he failed to achieve a greater appeal than the two high-profile candidacies of Mr. Obama and Ms. Hillary. In 2020, Mr. Biden stood for the presidential election even though no Democrat had ever defeated an incumbent president for a very long time. Mr. Joe Biden should be inaugurated as the 46th President of the United States of America on January 2021. He turned 78 on November the 20th, 2020. And he will be the oldest president in United States history. You may not be a supporter of Mr. Joe Biden, but you can be inspired by his story. Life has taught us that a person who usually succeeds is the person who never runs away from setbacks or failures. Winners are people who never give up. They develop the discipline, grit, and resilience to press on to success. If you don't quit, you will never lose. But when you quit, you are out of the race forever. The race may seem long, but the finishing line is just around the corner. Don't give up on your dream. Fight on. How did Mr. Joe Biden win the 2020 presidential election? Mr. Biden won 306 electoral votes, while President Trump won 232 electoral votes in the 2020 presidential election. Mr. Biden won more than 80 million votes, the highest in US history. He broke the previous record set by Mr. Obama of 69.5 million votes. Mr. Trump won about 74 million votes, the second highest in US history. To put things in perspective, President Trump held on very much to his base of supporters. President Trump won 92% of the voters who voted for him in 2016. He won about 10 million more votes than in 2016. President Trump increased his vote share of Republicans from about 86% in 2016 to 94% in 2020. He increased his vote share of self-described conservatives from 81% in 2016 to 85% in 2020. Mr. Biden and his team were able to attract the highest turnout of the Democratic Party base in 120 years. He won the majority of the popular vote, the highest ever for a Democratic nominee since 1972, a larger share than what Mrs. Hillary Clinton was able to achieve in 2016. Mr. Biden increased his share of Democratic votes from 89% in 2016 to 94% in 2020. He increased his shares of self-described liberals from 84% in 2016 to 89% in 2020. The major swing votes were from the self-described moderates. Mr. Biden won 64% of the middle ground, a 12-point lead over Mrs. Clinton in 2016. He won 13 points of votes from independents. Mrs. Clinton lost the group by 4 points. Winning the middle ground and the independents were the strongest victory on record since 1972. According to the National AP Votecast Survey, as well as the Wall Street Journal's analysis, Mr. Biden won a majority of women voters, especially single women and black women. Having Mrs. Kamala Harris, the first black woman and the first woman of Indian descent as a running mate could have been a major drawcut. Mr. Biden won more votes from people staying in cities and suburban areas. He also won the support of young voters and the better educated Americans. Those who are educated and upwardly mobile and who have benefited from globalization are more inclined to have the United States lead an open and rules-based global economy. Many of those who are not well educated and have not upgraded themselves adequately tend to be critical of the establishment. Many politicians have not paid heed to their plight and are not brave and strong enough to administer unpopular policies to improve their lots, including addressing wage gaps and social mobility and other issues. Many politicians have not paid heed to their plight and are not brave and strong enough to craft unpopular policies to improve their lots, including addressing wage gaps and social mobility and other issues. In the runoff elections in Georgia that was just completed, Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff are projected to defeat Republican incumbents Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, respectively. With the two potential victories, the Democrats and the Republicans will now each have 50 seats in the Senate, the upper house of Congress. However, the incoming Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris will preside over the Senate once she takes office. She will then have the tie-breaking vote. In other words, the Democratic Party of the United States and President-elect Joe Biden have virtually won control of the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the White House for the first time since 2009. For at least the first 2 years of the new term of office, the Biden administration can have a higher chance to shape the social, economic, and political agenda. They can fulfill a broader agenda on issues including additional stimulus package in response to the pandemic, government reform, economic recovery, healthcare, infrastructure, and climate change. There is also a higher chance of getting approval for Mr. Biden's nominees for cabinet and judicial posts. With a simple congressional majority, the Biden administration can also rescind any regulations the Trump administration have enacted in the final months of his presidency. With a simple congressional majority, the Biden administration can also rescind any regulations the Trump administration has enacted in the final months of his presidency. Hopefully, that will help the Biden presidency start off on the right foot. Having said that, there's still the filibuster that the Biden administration has to contend with in order to pass major legislation. In short, most bills can only pass if they have 60 or more votes in the Senate, unless the bill is subject to special procedures. Without 60 votes, any senator can block most bills using a procedure known as a filibuster. At its core, the filibuster is a rule that can possibly make it harder for Congress to pass laws. For senators in the minority, this is an advantage. They can prevent their opponents from passing bills that they do not like or force the majority to negotiate changes provided they have 41 votes needed to sustain a filibuster. The 2020 presidential election results show that the United States is more polarized and divided than before. The polarization is not only in terms of partisan interest and demographics, including racial and ethnic backgrounds, but also in terms of geographical boundaries. The deepening divide led to record turnout in this election, the highest in about 100 years, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Judging from the results, it is highly possible that Trump will make a comeback in 2024. If nothing else, the Republicans will continue many of Trump's initiatives to entrench and expand their base of support. They will continue to harp on fear of socialism, the God-gap protectionist stance, tax cuts, and the punishments of liberal elites. They will also push treaty allies to contribute more for their military defense and for better trading terms. What does Mr. Joe Biden stand for? First, his leadership style. Mr. Biden's communication style, tone, and approach will take almost a complete turn from that of President Trump. He will be more principled, consistent, and predictable. Most certainly, those of us living in another time zone will not have to stay up in the middle of the night and be concerned about President Trump's infamous tweets, because some of these tweets may move the market. President Trump has accused Mr. Biden of being a radical socialist. From past experiences, Mr. Biden is more of a moderate Democrat, a centrist who know how the government works and how to work with different people. Unlike President Trump, Mr. Biden does not take a binary approach to life. He will not take a fire and fury approach. He is able to accept that there are 50 shades of gray with various degree of nuances and complications. Mr. Biden has a reputation for being a relationship builder. He does not adopt a domineering and antagonistic disposition, and nor does he work alone and on a transactional basis. He knows how to cooperate, compromise, and collaborate with others across partisan lines so as to seek common interest. It will therefore be easier for him to get key stakeholders to come to the table to engage each other, develop plans, and resolve issues. The question that begs to be answered is, can Mr. Biden be the unifier of a polarized and divided country and Congress? Second, Mr. Biden's administration. Mr. Biden has pledged to be a president for all Americans. Unlike President Trump, who had mostly white people in his team, Mr. Biden is expected to have a cabinet that will reflect America's diversity. He will appoint experienced professionals from different backgrounds to take up major White House and cabinet positions. These leaders may not have to agree entirely with him. There will be room for more rigorous debates and discussions. Research has suggested that diversity in a leadership team can improve creativity and innovation. connect better to the ground, and make better decisions. Let's hope that it will be the case when Mr. Biden's administration swings into action. Mr. Biden has picked many Democratic leaders who have served in past administrations. This is a signal of continuity from past Democratic administrations. Having said that, Mr. Biden has made it known that his plans and policies are not a restructuring or continuation of Mr. Obama's plan and policies. He has not enrolled many of the key players in Mr. Obama's administration. Instead, he has recruited those who have held junior positions and have the potential to reimagine and redesign governance for a new world. Many of the people that Mr. Biden has proposed to hold senior appointments so far are mainstream economists and committed internationalists. They have a better understanding of bilateral and global relations, and they should be in a stronger position to work with allies and partners to navigate through complex and complicated foreign affairs. Mr. Biden believes in the importance of science. He will be more inclined to consult experts and domain knowledge specialists to make better informed decisions. The question that begs to be answered is, will a team of establishment figures from the past? The question that begs to be answered is, will a team of establishment figures from the past be able to break conventional mold and lead the United States through a new world of disorder? Third, prioritizing domestic issues over foreign affairs. The United States is one of the most advanced countries in the world, especially in the area of healthcare research and other services. It has slightly more than 4% of the world's population, but unfortunately, it has clocked almost 20% of fatalities due to COVID-19. This has in turn adversely affected the economy. President Trump and his administration have to take responsibility for the way they handled the pandemic and its outcomes. While protecting both lives and livelihoods are important, it is sad that President Trump seemed to have placed more emphasis on protecting livelihoods than lives. He has unwittingly or carelessly undermined the severity of the pandemic. Instead of taking firm and decisive and rapid actions based on recommendations by experts, they have allowed various forces to undermine proper response to the pandemic. Shortly after winning the presidential election, Mr. Biden convened a COVID-19 task force co-chaired by former Surgeon General Mr. Vivek Murthy and other prominent personalities in the healthcare sector. He has pledged to put up a stronger response than President Trump in responding to the pandemic. It includes increased testing, manufacture and supply of personal protective equipment, distribution of vaccines, and employment of about 100,000 contact tracers to help track and control transmission of the virus. If Mr. Biden and his administration can vaccinate an adequate number of Americans smoothly and speedily, the economy can start to turn around. This will help improve Mr. Biden's popularity. Besides tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Biden and his team will begin with focus on major domestic issues, including economic recovery, climate change, infrastructural improvements, cybersecurity, education and upgrading of broadband and wireless systems, and healing of the deep divides in the United States. Of shifting from America first to first among equal. President Trump's policy of putting America first has somewhat branded the United States as a revisionist power that's more focused on serving its own interests instead of having an enlightened self-interest. Unlike closing sales in a commercial transaction, building foreign relation is not necessarily based on a zero-sum game. Bilateral and global relations can be a growing sum game. By growing By working closely together with its allies and partners to serve mutual interests, the United States can grow the global economic pie, which in turn can benefit the United States. President Trump's projected with the US or without the US instead of together with US inclination. This perception is increasingly being perceived as showing disrespect and instability in the global community. It has eroded the United States' position as a responsible and reliable partner. In addition, it has weakened the multilateral system that was predominantly set up by the United States after World War II. The multilateral system has contributed to prospering the United States and brought about the longest stretch of peace, progress, and prosperity in modern history. Putting America first may eventually lead to America by itself. Mr. Biden understands this. He is a veteran in foreign relations. He has a lot on his plate to repair and refresh the United States' relation with both allies and partners. Many of them are weary and cynical that the United States will continue to stay on the normal track and will not revert to threat and strong arming its way to serve its own interests. If nothing else, these allies and partners will work towards being less dependent on the United States. They will ring fence and protect themselves by diversifying their geopolitical alliances and economic partnerships. If rebuilding the alliance network, Mr. Biden has been a veteran on the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations and has served twice as its chairman. He has a stronger grasp of international affairs than President Trump. As a well-known transatlantist, he knows that one of the strengths of the United States is its association with treaty allies and other close partnerships and coalitions. Shortly after winning most of the seats in the presidential election, Mr. Biden made calls to traditional allies, including Canada, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Germany, and France, as well as Japan, South Korea, and Australia in the Asia Pacific. Mr. Biden and his administration will put in efforts to repair the rift that he has inherited from President Trump, refresh relations, and rebuild trust and confidence level. They will take a more cooperative and a less aggressive approach. The focus will be on how to leverage each other's strength to advance mutual interest rather than on how much different governments have to pay the United States for its support of military defense in their countries. It is unlikely that Mr. Biden and his team will continue the tariff war with Canada and the European Union, especially tariffs that hurt American businesses and consumers. Chances are they will work more closely with the European Union and shore up the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in response to threats from Russia and China. The challenge is to assure allies and partners that the US will not reverse its foreign policy just like President Trump reversed Mr. Obama's policy. It will not be an easy task for a divided and polarized country and Congress. In the near term, Mr. Biden and his administration have to assure long-established allies such as Australia that the United States will stand by them. For example, the United States will have to find ways to help Australia respond to the worsening spat with China, including potential diplomatic freezes, commercial threats, and economic partnership. For example, the United States will have to find ways to help Australia respond to the worsening spat with China, including potential diplomatic freezes, commercial threats, and economic punishment. The actions taken by the US government will send a positive signal to its allies and partners that the US can be counted upon in times of need. 6. Strengthening multilateral institution and multilateralism. Mr. Biden knows that any tendency towards extreme nationalism, isolationism, and unilateralism will not serve the United States' interests in an interconnected and interdependent world. It will also affect international cooperation and collaboration to tackle major transnational issues, including challenges related to climate change, organized crime, natural disasters, pollutions, international terrorism, religious and racial extremism, cyber attacks, human trafficking, refugee crisis, nuclear proliferation, trade and commerce barriers, human rights, animal welfare, and global health issues. All these issues can have a detrimental effect on the United States and its people. Take the COVID-19 pandemic, for instance. The pandemic has shown that no government can resolve an international crisis alone. The government can choose to go its way, but international crises can go in every and any way. Governments have to work on a multilateral basis to contain and resolve the pandemic. If medical researchers and other professionals in different parts of the world did not collaborate with one another, it would not have been possible to develop the vaccines in record time. Without multilateral collaboration, the COVID-19 pandemic cannot be tackled. Global economy cannot take off. The United States, even if it has adequate vaccines, is not safe unless and until the rest of the world is safe. The US cannot adequately control the pandemic unless the pandemic can be adequately controlled in other countries, both near and far. Since World War II, the US has played an important role in developing global economic and financial architecture and trade and commerce system. These systems have increasingly become irrelevant and even redundant in a fast changing world. In general, many developed countries are looking forward to the US to upgrade multilateral institutions and help restore these institutions to proper functionality. These institutions include the United Nations, World Trade Organization, the Organization for Economic Cooperation, and the International Monetary Fund. The US is one of the major beneficiaries of global peace, progress, and prosperity. Therefore, it is likely that Mr. Biden will be inclined to strengthen multilateral institutions and promote multilateralism. He has indicated that the United States will rejoin the World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Accord, and the Comprehensive Plan of Action on Iran's nuclear program, signed between Tehran and 5 members of the United States Security Council together with Germany. He will reverse President Trump's action on deferred action for childhood arrivals and the Muslim ban which bars entry of nationals from 7 Muslim majority countries, namely Iran, Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen. Mr. Biden will likely champion liberal democratic values and make it a guiding principle of the US foreign policy. Although many Democrats support globalization, it is unlikely that they will fully open up the US market, especially when the economy is still languishing. They will eventually work on refreshing fair trade agreements with emphasis on liberal democratic values, including high labor, human rights, intellectual property, and environmental standards. These values obviously work in favor of US industries and enterprises, while at the same time contribute to a better world. Mr. Biden is expected to confront enemies and despots around the world instead of focusing on a few countries that have been on President Trump's nerves, such as Cuba and Venezuela. The Biden administration will work towards updating the open and rules-based international order, especially rules governing global trade and commerce. They would prefer to prime the work of upgrading the crumbling multilateral system rather than let another country or group of countries do it. especially China and countries that are supporting China. If the US doesn't take the lead, it may eventually be left behind in the new economy. To do that, the US has to refresh its image, rebuild the morale and dexterity of its diplomacy core, and redesign its foreign relations policy and initiatives in a multipolar and more contested world. 7. Revisiting the United States policy towards China. The US-China trade war is more than just a trade war. It is a battle for global geopolitical, ideological, economic, military, social, cultural, and technological influence. Case in point, Chinese share of global GDP was about 1.7% about 4 decades ago. It has grown steadily to about 16%. According to forecasts by the Center for Economics and Business Research, China's economy will overtake that of the United States in 2028, 5 years earlier than expected. Based on purchasing power parity, China is already the number one economy. The US has been dominating the global economy since World War II. It's hard for Americans to envisage playing second fiddle to China in the future. The battle for control in the new economy is in the areas of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, social media, e-commerce, and outer space. In this regard, the gap between the United States and China is narrowing. Therefore, China is deemed to be a strategic competitor and rival by both Democratic and Republican camps. The anti-China sentiment is also felt in many quarters of the business community and society. After winning the presidential election, Mr. Biden has committed to restoring US global leadership and leading the rules-based liberal international order. He promised to lead the world, not retreat from it. To do so, he has to respond to the rivalry and challenges posed by China. Mr. Biden has announced that he will not continue the strategic empathy towards China, a position he adopted when he was Mr. Obama's vice president. Instead, he believes that the United States does need to get tough with China on a whole range of issues which are, quote unquote, robbing the United States and American companies of their technology and intellectual property. It is unlikely that the US or China will want to go to war. Mr. Biden will not want a full decoupling from China. On the other hand, there won't be a complete reset of relations. Mr. Biden will not remove President Trump's major measures against China. That would be a sign of weakness, and it may extract a political prize in the midterm elections in 2 years' time, and quite possibly the next presidential election. Mr. Biden will most likely replace President Trump's Cold War with Cold Peace. A Cold War is a battle between two adversaries with a possibility of open conflict. It can only lead to more potential heart-wrenching skirmishes and conflicts. It may end up hurting both countries as China is more integrated with not only the US economy, but also with the global economy than, for example, Russia. Mr. Biden and his team will develop initiatives to limit China's growth, work with their network of allies and partners to exert coordinated pressures on China, restrict China's access to markets, selected products and foundational technologies of the future from artificial intelligence to quantum computing, and confront China on intellectual property violations and human rights issues and other issues in Tibet, Xinjiang, Uyghur Autonomous Region, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the South China Sea. Mr. Biden will leverage the recently established International Development Finance Corporation to counter China's influence through its Belt Road initiatives, especially in emerging economies. Hopefully, there will not be a miscalculation and misfire during the COPs. As they say, when elephants fight or make love, the grass will suffer. Many countries will somehow be dragged into the controversies and challenges between these two countries, and for that matter, any great power rivalry. The concern is that they may be forced to take sides and have to undergo challenges on how to potentially operate in two major decoupled economies and in a bifurcated technological environment. In such a case, there will be a dampening effect on the global economy. The question that will stay in our mind for a while is, will Mr. Joe Biden, the presidential candidate, stand for similar positions as President Joe Biden? What are the impacts on the economy and markets in the near future? Let's examine some of the potential major initiatives. First, stimulus package. The 116th US Congress approved the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, also known as the CARES Act, a 2.2 trillion economic stimulus bill, and it was signed into law by President Trump on March 27, 2020. The stimulus package aims to help struggling individuals, families, businesses, institutions, and the economy in general. On Sunday, 27 December 2020, President Trump approved $2.3 trillion worth of pandemic relief package to support unemployment benefits to more than 14 million people. The package also includes $1.4 trillion in spending to keep government agencies running and $892 billion in COVID-19 relief. So far, the financial support from both packages is the largest in the world in terms of absolute amount as well as percentage of the US GDP. While the latest package is urgently needed, many economists reckon that the financial aid in the bill should be higher to stimulate economic recovery. After becoming the president, Mr. Biden is expected to propose another economic relief package to tackle the pandemic and support the economy. Second, trade. Mr. Biden will work on a Buy American procurement policy, rebuild the US manufacturing base, restore critical products and services, including medical and logistical chain services to protect its national and economic security, penalize offshoring of enterprises, especially those that are capitalizing in large part on the US market. Mr. Biden and his administration will press for more regulatory control to curb undue power of major technology firms such as Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. It's unlikely that he will introduce major new tariffs that will hurt American consumers and businesses. He will work with allies and partners to improve trade and commerce. Mr. Biden supports the United States Mexico-Canada agreement. However, it is unlikely that he will endorse any new free trade agreement in the near future. Mr. Biden and his team will take a cautious approach in signing the comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership for fear of potential backlash from many voters, including those in labor and environmental groups. Third, infrastructure. Based on his Build Back Better plan, Mr. Biden will seek to upgrade the infrastructure, including roads, rails, bridges, aviation, ports, next generation of electric grids, and clean water and other public services. Promote development of green industries and clean energy technologies in response to climate change and also to capitalize on growing demand for green products and services. Mr. Biden will invest in wireless broadband via 5G network to better compete in a new economy. Of wages and taxes, Mr. Biden wants to double the federal minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 an hour. He plans to increase corporate tax as well as taxes on the top 1% of income earners. President Trump cuts corporate tax from 35% to 21%. Mr. Biden wants to take back half and increase the corporate tax rate to 28%. He has said that he won't increase taxes for those earning less than $400,000 per year. He is also working on tax relief for the middle class families, including expansion of the child tax credit. His proposed tax regimes may result in outflow of capital. Asian assets may become more attractive to some American investors. Fifth, healthcare. Mr. Biden plans to build on President Obama's Affordable Care Act and develop what he called Biden Care. If he has his way, there will be an option to enroll in a public health insurance option. If he has his way, there will be an option to enroll in a public health insurance program. He will fight for Americans with pre-existing conditions to continue to have access to healthcare. Six, education. Mr. Biden endeavors to expand tuition-free colleges, support student loan debt forgiveness, and push for universal preschool access. To fulfill his slogan of Build Back Better, Mr. Biden will have to make bold reforms. Besides tackling the pandemic, he has to raise massive amounts of money to rebuild a largely aging infrastructure, invest in research and development of technology that will play an important part in the fourth industrial revolution, redevelop a stronger manufacturing base of critical products and services, turn the tide on climate change, resolve growing gaps in income and racial inequality, and offer safety nets for those who are left behind. As one of the largest beneficiaries of the longest stretch of peace, progress, and prosperity since World War II, the United States has to play an instrumental role in refreshing and expanding global trade and commerce. To fulfill his plan, Mr. Biden will add about $5.6 billion to the national debt till 2030. Tax revenues cannot cover increase in proposed spending. Unlike the global economic crisis, most of the spending will not go to the banking and financial sector, but to the people on the ground. It will have a more direct benefit to the economy in general. As with all major proposals, Mr. Biden will need to persuade both Republicans and Democrats in the Congress to come to the table to negotiate and approve his proposed spending. Will the US be able to achieve any form of new normal within the next 12 to 18 months? What are the challenges ahead? Mr. Biden is going to be a crisis president. He will take over the Oval Office to face major challenges from day one. Many of these challenges may take more than one term of presidential office to resolve. Let's examine some of these challenges. First, resolving COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. Biden and his administration will have to go full throttle to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. The previous administration has unfortunately focused more on the economy than lives. It also does not help that many Americans have not done their part to protect themselves and prevent spread of the virus. As a result, the number of cases and fatalities have been on a steep increase. Even though there are vaccines that can treat the virus, many Americans may not want to be vaccinated. It will also take quite a while to vaccinate enough people to achieve mass immunity. Secondly, tackling economic recovery. The virus-wrecked economy is on an increasingly steep decline in the United States. The virus-wrecked economy is on an increasingly steep decline, not just in the United States, but also across the developed world. The current deficit is about 20% of GDP, the highest since World War II. The national debt is projected to be more than 100% of GDP by the end of 2021. Many small businesses in America is on the verge of collapse. The unemployment rate is more than 7%. More than 10 million are currently jobless, and the numbers is still increasing. The risk for those who are unemployed is that they may lose motivation to get back to the workforce and adjust to the working environment. Their skill set may also become less useful or even redundant. Mr. Biden and his team have an enormous task to turn around the economy and put the economy on a steady track. In addition, they have to work with leaders overseas to tackle the deepest global downturn since the 1930s. Thirdly, leading a disunited States of America. Mr. Biden will be leading an increasingly polarized and divided nation and a fractured and fractious people. Democracy has also been stretched and shaken. Mr. Biden has to walk a delicate balance between the Republicans and the Democrats, conservatives and liberals, progressives and centrists, among other divided groups. For example, he has to address racial inequality and other grievances highlighted by the Black Lives Matter protests. Many of the Make America Great Again supporters will not go easy on him and his team to refresh the country and restructure the economy. If Mr. Biden and his team cannot formulate a social compact that will earn the trust and confidence of their people, it will be hard-pressed for them to push through major reforms for a better future. The Americans should heed the words of Abraham Lincoln: "A house divided against itself cannot stand." Fourthly, fighting lingering ghosts from the past. Although President Trump had promised an orderly transition of power, he and his team will most likely make it hard for the new administration to reverse President Donald Trump's policies. Some of his last-minute actions may make it hard for Mr. Biden to carry out his duties effectively and efficiently. There are other issues that have not been properly handled. For example, in the recent SolarWinds cyber attack on the US government and industry, President Trump had undermined severity of the hack. He said that everything is under control and blamed the media for playing up the damages. Like most governments in the developed world, the US government is dependent on info communication systems to function properly. In addition, companies such as Microsoft, Cisco Systems, and FireEye that have been subjected to the attack are currently serving many customers globally, including governmental agencies and private enterprises that provide critical services to the general public. The extent of the cyber viruses that have been embedded into the current system is uncertain, and it may take years to uncover. Meanwhile, these cyber viruses can be used as advanced, persistent threats to steal and change information and cause major damages. Fifthly, pushing through plans and policies. Although the Democratic Party controls the House of Representatives and the Senate, it will still be challenging for Mr. Biden to push through his manifesto and future plans and policies. Mr. Biden has to make compromises to win enough votes on both sides of the aisle to implement any major changes. As there are more conservatives on the bench of the Supreme Court of the United States, it may be harder for Mr. Biden to push through major reforms just in case these major reforms are being challenged in the courts. Just like what President Trump did, Mr. Biden may have to rely on executive orders to achieve faster but incremental progress to achieve his policy goals. It bodes well to remember that the next president can also do the same and reverse Mr. Biden's plan and policies. Sixthly, leading a divided Democratic Party. Mr. Biden is leading a political party that is not altogether the most united. Winning the presidential election has helped to preserve discipline and tolerance. It has galvanized talents and energies in the Democratic Party. With President Trump out of the way soon, it is likely that there will be internal tussles for positions and powers. Mr. Biden has to establish an administration to please a broad spectrum of his supporters, including those who donated and supported him during the recent presidential campaign. Mr. Biden will have to contend with both current and new shivers of sharks that is not acting in the interests of the United States. They can operate from both within and outside of the government during the new term of office. The swarm will also comprise external forces that want to influence direction of the United States for various agendas. Mr. Biden may have to grant favors to different stakeholders to secure a second term of office and also to help the Democratic Party win future elections. Such pork barrel politics has always been around, and it has affected proper running and efficiency of the United States government. 7. Administering bitter medicine. There are other challenges that have been brewing for years. You may not like the motives, means, and ends of President Trump's actions, but you cannot fault him on identifying major fault lines in the United States. For example, he highlighted adversity of the swarm in the government. He also brought to attention the growing disquiet among Americans, racial injustice and social mobility, and wage gap and stagnation are some of the elephants in the room. For most US workers, the real average wage has about the same purchasing power it did 40 years ago. Most of the wage gains have gone largely to high-income earners. According to the United States Census Bureau, income inequality in 2019 has reached its highest level in 50 years. Experts have argued that President Trump is a symbol of these problems and not an aberration, as Mr. Biden had described his presidential rival. Mr. Biden and his team will have an uphill climb to convince many Americans that it is not globalization and international trade that are costing them jobs, but online services, digitalization, and other disruptive technologies and systems. The question that begs to be answered is, will Mr. Biden and his administration be strong enough to prescribe the necessary, albeit bitter medicine to respond to these problems and effect needed changes? Can the new administration build a broad-based, inclusive, and sustainable economic recovery that will raise the economic tide so that all boats can be lifted? 8. Responding to market reactions. The rising national deficits and debt levels supported by quantitative easing will put pressures on the market, US dollar, and the economy in general. Investors, enterprises, and countries that are dependent on the US economy and US dollar denominated debt will be hit. There will be a K-shaped recovery in many sectors as well as in developed economies as a result of the impact of the pandemic on different industries, sectors, and countries and their responses to the pandemic. The US does not exist in a vacuum and cannot be totally shielded from the global economy. Some countries are inclining towards greater protectionism and deglobalization. There are possibilities of stronger economic decoupling between the US and China. These issues do not bode well in supporting economic recovery and growth. The COVID-19 pandemic can potentially lead to other crises that will impact the US economy and the rest of the global economy. The COVID-19 pandemic can potentially lead to other crises that will impact the US economy and the rest of the global economy. Taking a leaf out of the past, the global economic crisis played a part in influencing the Eurozone crisis, international armed conflicts, the refugee crisis, and rise of populism across the world. The economic uncertainty and risk will contribute to a volatile market. More than 25% of S&P 500 stocks comprise of major technology stocks, including Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Tesla. Antitrust, tax-related or other pressures on these technology stocks by regulatory bodies in the United States, Europe, and China will have a dampening effect on the market. Increase in corporate tax and taxes on the wealthiest individuals may cause a flight of capital and invoke other negative reactions from the market. Investors may switch to hard assets, including precious metals and other commodities, real estate, and cryptocurrencies. These assets may not have major cascading effects on improving the economy. There may be a selling off of US Treasury, and these may have undue upward pressures on inflationary and interest rates over time. Mr. Biden and his team will be kept busy if there is a major adverse reaction from the market, especially when there are growing calls that the economy is due for a major recession. Number 9, facing challenges in the horizon. Last but not least, there are other challenges in the not too distant future that will have severe impact on the economy and the country. In recent times, the Americans have experienced the backlash of global warming and how damaging it can be to lives and livelihoods. There will also be major technological and other disruptive forces that will impact jobs, wages, and the economy. These and other challenges are not easy challenges to tackle, especially for a 78-year-old leader. The democratic system in the US has recently been challenged. However, I'm still cautiously optimistic about the regenerative qualities of democracy. The recent presidential election proves that democracy can prevent the United States from digging and falling into a hole as a result of President Trump's authoritarian, isolationist, and ethnocentric inclinations. The United States have been able to overcome many challenges in the past. It has many inherent strengths that can help the United States recover and even rise to a higher level. It has a relatively young, educated, and skillful workforce. There are ample financial and other resources. The country has no major threats from near or far. It has a strong alliance network and partnership. The United States is still a dominant player in major industries, and it is still able to attract some of the best talents from all over the world. So, never undermine the creative and innovative American spirit in rebuilding the country and recovering its economy. How then should you respond? This is part of a series of webinars that I have recorded. These webinars will be uploaded in the near future. Please watch all the webinars to give yourself a comprehensive and in-depth perspective on how you can survive and thrive in a new world. The landscape in the near future will be characterized by what experts would call a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. Suffice to say, volatility is not an enemy. Uncertainty is not a foe. As they say, there are silver linings in every cloud, even in the dark night. Some industries and enterprises will not be impacted by economic and cyclical downturns. They include many healthcare, education, defense, pharmaceutical, energy, infrastructure, and green industries and businesses. There will be distressed and undervalued assets for sale. Look out for market niches and gaps that you can exploit. Whatever the case, during a downturn, prepare for an upturn wisely. Aim to be the first off the block to reap from an economic recovery and to forge ahead of your competitors. In our series of webinars, we will be sharing with you on how you can prepare yourself to thrive in the exciting new world of abnormal. So don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for the latest webinars on how to survive and thrive in a new economy. Thank you.